Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Weni Teo and I'm the Senior Lecturer in Modern and Contemporary Art here at the courtyard, and it's a great pleasure to be able to welcome you here tonight to this event, which is the first in a series of 4 lectures as part of the Asymmetry Distinguished Lecture Series, Energies of Attachment, Rethinking Intimacy in Chinese and Sinophone Art. This series will run until May and culminate in an international symposium. So please check the Research Forum website for more details, and please sign up to the mailing list as well. We are just so thrilled to be partnering with the Asymmetry Art Foundation and here to tell you more about their wonderful activities. I would like to introduce the moderator of tonight's event, who will then introduce our speakers today. So Michèle Ruo Yi Landolt is Deputy Director at Asymmetry Art Foundation and based in London. Prior to heading up Asymmetry, Michèle served as Gallery Weekend Beijing's exhibition director, where she created and led the artistic and cultural program, and worked at Mine 36 Gallery in Zurich with a focus on exhibition projects between and across Europe and China. Michèle graduated from the University of Zurich in Art History and English Studies, and I'm very proud to say was a former student of mine here at the Courtauld, where she received an MA in the History of Art and wrote an excellent dissertation on technology and spirituality in the work of the artists Tao Fei, Timo Sitin, and Liu Shuang. So I will now hand over to Michèle. Welcome back, Michèle.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your wonderful introduction, Weni. It is really so exciting to be back. Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for coming to tonight's lecture titled Intimate Tetherings, Xinyi, Cheng, and Alvin Li in Conversation. This is the first installment of a brand new lecture series that we are launching with the Courtauld as part of a wider partnership, which entailed this Asymmetry Distinguished Lecture Series on Contemporary Chinese and Sinophone Art. It's a mouthful, which will culminate annually in an international symposium, but as well as 2 postdoc fellowships in the research of contemporary Chinese and Sinophone art. I know that many of you know us and what we do at Asymmetry, but just very briefly, for those who don't, we are a newly established, not-for-profit, independent art foundation founded by patron of the arts Yan Du, who's in the audience tonight. And we create and support professional and academic opportunities in forms of fellowships and scholarships in conjunction with museums and galleries and universities geared towards curators, writers, and scholars who, to any extent, identify with greater Chinese and Sinophone cultures and heritage. We've recently opened a multi-purpose space in East London and have a public program of our own. So please do keep an eye out on our programming and our channels. Now, this collaboration with the Courtauld is an important one, not just because it's such an established university in the field, but because it does have an excellent department that focuses on the study of modern and contemporary Chinese and Asian art. Can you hear me all right? I don't have that loud of a voice, thank you. But this lecture today, which is more of a conversation, is part of the lecture series, which will take place monthly here until May. And as Weni before iterated, it's about energies of attachment and rethinking intimacy in contemporary Chinese and Sinophone art. It is organized by Weni and our first Asymmetry postdoc fellow, Dr. Fei-Xuan Xu, and myself. Now, sitting here with me are Xinyi and Alvin. Thank you both so much as well for joining us today. Briefly speaking about your bios, Xinyi lives and works in Paris and studied at the Academy of Arts and Design at Tsinghua University and the Maryland Institute College of Art. From 2016 to 2017, Xinyi participated in the Rijksacademy residency in Amsterdam, and in 2019 received the Baloise Art Prize. Her work has been the subject of a major solo museum exhibition at the Hamburger Bahnhof in Berlin in 2020 and 21, as well as the Lafayette Anticipations in Paris last year. Her numerous group shows have included her work, amongst them at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, the Renaissance Society in Chicago, and the 13th Shanghai Biennial and the Bourse de Commerce, again in Paris. Alvin Li is a curator and writer based between London and Shanghai. He currently serves as adjunct curator, Greater China, supported by the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation at Tate, and is a contributing editor at Frieze. As a fiction writer, he's featured in Spike Art Quarterly and held readings at Cell Project Space this summer in 2022 here in London, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego in 2020, and the current LA Public Art Triennial in 2019. Alvin is also the co-founder of Shanghai Pride Film Festival, Shanghai's first LGBTQ-themed film festival, and CinemaQ, a Shanghai-based queer film and publishing collective that organizes monthly screenings focusing on East Asian queer independent productions. Now, we're getting into the conversation. Xinyi and Alvin, you met for the first time in 2017, also here in London, through the introduction of a mutual friend and artist, Shen Xin, and you've developed a close relationship since. Now, as you say, you've been cultivating this friendship through exchange and correspondence, but also cultivating an exchange on your work. Xinyi, you're an artist. Most of us know your work through your paintings, and Alvin, you are a writer. What I would like us to talk about now is your relationships of your medium of choice, respectively, and how your trajectories have led you here.
Sure. I guess I'll start. I'll also kind of make a brief introduction to make it less nerve-wracking, because that's what I feel right now. So, when I received this invitation from Courtyard and Asymmetry, I was really thrilled, but also super nervous, because my own love affair with affect theory really happened after I left academia. So it was really kind of, especially in the past few years, as the world becomes what it is now, the reading of affects by scholars like Lauren Berlin or Jose Esteban Munoz became so much part of, my daily coping. And it was really kind of, as I was working in the art world, that I got into it. And when I think about how affect moves and how affect moves us, I think Xinyi's painting has always come to mind in the way that, she depicts bodies and objects captured in these kind of moments of at once stasis and movement, but also kind of, yearning and idleness. Yeah, and as I was talking to both of you preparing for this talk, I know Xinyi is not an affect theory reader or much theory in general. It's very much grounded in her practice in painting. So, I just wanted to say this conversation doesn't start from a place of already knowing how she applies affect into her work. Instead, we're going to have a conversation that really starts with Xinyi's practice. Yeah, so I guess I would start by asking, I know Xinyi also dabbles with some other mediums, sometimes sculpture, bit of photography, but overall, you consider yourself a painter. Would you agree with this observation?
Yeah, I I agree with this observation. I do see actually, yesterday when I was crossing the border from France to the UK, the custom officer actually asked me, "What do you do?" And I told him I'm an artist. And then he asked me, "What kind of art do you do?" I told him I'm a painter. And he said, "What kind of painter do you do?" I said, "I'm a figurative painter." And he asked if he could see some of my works. But yeah, I actually studied sculpture when I was in college. But
in Beijing, right?
Yeah. For the Chinese speakers here is Tsinghua Meiyuan. It used to be Zhongyang Gongyi Meiyuan. And I also did the training before going into Chinese Art Academy, which means when I was in high school, I spent 3 years drawing life models, painting life models, and then 4 years in college sculpting life models like portraits with clothes, without clothes, and then the whole body with clothes, without clothes for 4 years. but I don't do any of them anymore.
Right.
Mm.
But as you move to mica, is it
Yeah.
mica? Mica?
Yeah,
That you
mica.
you kind of left sculpture behind and really got into painting. Is that?
I actually always kind of painted it on the side. My parents took me to Paris for the first time when I was 12 years old, and I visited the Musée Marmottan, if I say it right. Like it's like there is a huge collection of impressionist paintings, and I fell in love with Monet, and so I always painted on the side, and I was an impressionist painter. But I didn't really find my voice at all. I remember like for my college training is more like a social realism, like follow the social realism lineage, but I kind of consider being a impressionist painter on the side is my thing. And I was quite serious about it. I remember when I was in my 3rd year in college, I brought my landscape paintings to one of my professors to ask for some advice. And then he looked at them and he said that they're nice, but you know, like 95% of our students in college, they can paint like that. So what's your point? And I was heartbroken, and I just couldn't. And then till now, I couldn't paint landscape, and I also don't want painting plein air anymore ever again. And then I just felt like I need to get out there, and I applied to grad schools in the US.
Right.
And the MICA was the best school I got into.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wanted to split like completely from before. And then
But before you mean also your kind of realist training,
yeah,
mostly.
social realism and also impressionism. I want to say goodbye
Uh-huh.
to all of them. Yeah.
Right. And what were you exposed to as you got into mica, and what were some of the earlier kind of experimentation that you did?
I think I was really ignorant when I arrived in the US. I think I didn't know very much about what is the contemporary painting in general. I know about Lucien Freud from my training in China because he was considered the greatest figurative painting in 20th century. When I arrived at MICA, I remember I got into the multidisciplinary program where I studied with sculptors, video artists, conceptual artists, but there is a painting program. And I remember in that program, I think the artists really mostly paint abstract paintings. I think through them, I got to know about Agnes Martin, Frank Stella, Joseph Albers, Ellsworth Kelly, like all the abstract minimalist painters.
But so as you kind of like said complete no to realism, but you kind of stuck with figuration. I'm really curious if you could like say a little more about that.
I think I'm interested in people, and it didn't took me a long time that I realized I need to paint people still. I kind of see that the figuration is the vessel where I could paint emotions. I don't know. I tried to be a abstract painter. I did 1 or 2 paintings. I just don't think I have anything I can grasp. I just don't know. Yeah, I just don't know how to do it. And I just stuck with figurative painting. And at that time, my teacher, Frances Barth, she introduced me to some interesting American modernists, for example, like John Graham, Marston Hartley, Bob Thompson. And I kind of felt like I wanted to have like quite flat figures and then draw all their outlines, so they kind of be like abstract shapes. And I felt like I wanted to reject my past through like not painting any shadows, not render any, not make anything look realistic, not having any volume in them, and do everything through color and shapes.
I'm also interested in the kind of context at this moment, as you kind of decided to, go with figuration, not realism. What was the kind of, because you were describing your Micah at the time being predominantly abstract. And in that case, was your peer and, professors, were they encouraging this kind of direction? And also I was thinking, as a Chinese student at the time, and I believe in early 2010s, I feel like there's still a kind of, even now, I would imagine a kind of insistence or, why don't we deal with your Chinese background or Chineseness or some aspect of that? Yeah, I'm just curious how.
I feel like in school, you always have to justify yourself. Why what you're doing is why what you're doing is meaningful somehow. And I did feel pressure, and I did try to come up with something to say, but at the same time I feel I don't know, I don't feel like I want to make painting then with like a 5 minutes introduction given the background of what I'm making. So I feel like if I make paintings about China, first of all, I don't feel like at that time I have anything very insightful to say. Second of all, I kind of like believe the work has to speak for itself instead of me talking about it, giving a context. So I kind of just didn't want to worry about it. But I feel like as a painter, a figurative painter in the graduate program, like I got confronted more with questions like, or judgment, like your painting looks decorative. And I have found that hard to deal with.
I think so. I think your paintings now, as they developed, have a kind of really focused subject matter, right? Depicting people and things you encounter in everyday life, which then you then cast into sort of fantasy scenarios, underwater, disorienting, like in the sunset and forest. So can you just explain a bit more about the process, your working process, as you have matured? And we're showing a lot of images of the photography as well. So the relationship between photography and your painting, and your relationship to the people that you paint and work with.
I take a lot of photos because I think I really need photo references. And also I don't want to paint from life either again. So I don't have the photographic memory. So I always kind of take photos. I take photos whenever I feel I have an impulse to do so. And then I kind of make drawings based on the photos to reduce elements to like everything in the drawing is what I'm excited to paint. I feel like it's kind of like collages in my mind.
I'm interested in what you just said about reduction. Was it somehow a response to the comment about being decorative? Is there a link there, you think?
Yeah, for sure. I felt like to fight against this kind of comments, maybe I can make very precise decisions within the painting. Like everything I paint, I know exactly how it's gonna function and help the image, and everything feels necessary.
And what are the kind of relationship with the people? You said you don't really paint them, like you don't have a model over at your studio ever. You just take photos, and I believe most of the figures are kind of friends or people you know pretty well, right?
Yeah, I paint people I know. I think there are a couple of ways I can start a painting. Sometimes I have a situation in mind I want to paint, or and then I invite people come to my friends, the people I want to paint in my studio, and I ask them to reenact the situation, and I take photos of them, and then I make drawings based on the photographs. But there are also like moments that I captured of them like drinking, smoking a cigarette. I think that process is a little different.
As much as you despise your training in realism, I was wondering, as you were forming this language of your new era of figuration, were there aspects of that training that remained, or?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think it kind of gives me some confidence when I paint the figure. Even when I'm really, because I think painting a good face and painting a good hand is very hard. And I kind of labor. Well, I spend a lot of time and trying to figure out how I can paint a good face. And then when there are times it looks really ugly, but I kind of feel like I always have confidence in me that I can figure it out. And I feel like maybe the 7 years when I was a teenager, in college, all those years painting life model helped me in some way.
Can I interject here? Because thinking about you as a creator in relation to your subjects, and here we have seen some images with characters in them, right? It takes me to this realm of tensions between the private and the public, as well as interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
If we think back again in terms of intimacy, can we speak about that some more?
Yeah, for sure. I think what you just said are kind of established that your relationship to the figures you paint, they're not models, but they're kind of characters that you cast and let them go through a process of fabrication in a way. Would you agree with this description?
I think for now they are. I felt like the people I paint, they play a role in the painting. They are not playing themselves. They are characters.
But all the scenes most of the scenes that you paint are quite intimate, right? They're between lovers, or extreme close-up shots of kissing and touching, and and I think you paint with the understanding that these intimate, private moments are going to be exhibited in public. So I'm quite curious, like, do you take pleasure of this public display of private intimacies? Is that something that you're constantly aware of as you're making them?
I think I had some doubts about it, but now I think it's still intimate. Well, I feel like when I started to make this painting, some of the paintings I didn't have a lot of shows, and the people I paint were people I hung out with, and then I made the painting, and they come to my studio, they see the painting, and I felt like that was very intimate for sure. And then I got opportunities to show at galleries and museums. And I also had this question for myself that if an intimate painting is shown in a public space, does the intimacy still stay? Then recently I went to see the Edward Hopper show at the Whitney Museum, and I went there on a very busy day. But I put my headphone on, and then I walk through the gallery, and when I see the physical painting, I still feel the connection, me and the painting and the maker. I still feel like it's a one-on-one relationship, and the experience could be very intimate. Right. But I do have doubts when the image of the painting, the image of the painting post on Instagram and then spread on social media, I feel like that relationship changes. And it gets complicated.
Right.
Because you don't have, because when you see a painting in person, I feel like your reaction to the painting is very physical, but doesn't really translate on digital media.
Right.
Then it's not intimate anymore, I think.
Yeah. I think this relationship to intimacy, there are two levels that you kind of describe. One is in terms of display, right? How can we use physical exhibition display as a method to preserve some aspects of the privateness, intimacy of the work? But I'm also interested in how, despite one-on-one relationship between the audience and the work, there's also this sense of interpersonal, like transference or communication or kind of empathy in a sense in that experience, which, as you said, this digital form of display doesn't really have. But I'm also, I guess I'm interested in how your working relationships with your characters, which are, close friends, intimate, how that in a sense becomes a mirror image or microcosm of your kind of understanding of the social. Yeah, like why do you have to work with real life friends and encounters instead of, say, having a kind of conventional economic relationship, like you pay a model and then because I guess when you have this kind of intimate relationships with your characters, the feeling of intimacy is also very fragile. Any kind of impression of the slightest infringement, it also can feel like a betrayal or a violation. I guess I say this because, in my much less visible and kind of little experimental writing project, I also kind of only exclusively work with real events and real people in my life. And for me, there's a commitment to a kind of lineage of queer feminist pedagogy and writing that, really engage with the personal is the political. One of my, really big influence, George Kuchar, he's known for the series called Weather Diaries from the 80s, when camcorder became first available. And then what he did is he used this, mass media, kind of despised medium in a sense, to shoot everyday image. It really has to be things within immediate reach to make works that actually formally really resonated with high modernism in a sense. So that's kind of my position. And sometimes it has, I guess, hurt friends in my, circle. Like how can you make this into your work? Like, so I wonder how you have, kept on this way of collaborating.
I think first of all, I really adore and admire the people I paint. I think some of them I'm very close to, and I know they are very kind people, and they are just so not boring, and then they are very beautiful and could be strange, and I just feel like knowing them just give me so much ingredients and feelings. But I feel like now I make these paintings, I am not making a representation of them. As I said before, I think I'm turning them into characters, and I want to create situations. I want them to be very rich characters. So in a way, I felt like maybe now they are also kind of private because they are not playing themselves. And also now they all know that that I'm painting them, and they trust. I'm so grateful that they trust me, letting me do things with their image. But I don't know. I feel like, Alvin, I asked you to write quite a few articles on me, and Alvin wrote an essay for my catalog, and a couple of years ago, you also wrote a feature for Interview magazine, and I actually felt like those features or like portraits, my portraits made by you, and also felt like they are in your interpretations of me. And I felt like in some way, I feel it's okay to be portrayed. But Alvin, he writes kind of erotic stories as well. I don't know if you know that. And I recently read them. And in your article, in your writing, the people, the characters I think they all feel a lot more real than mine because they have the real name and the real place and real feelings. Can you tell?
I think it's really, I just cannot resist this kind of public display of extremely private sentiment. And I really stick to that. And that can be offensive. I guess it can be ruthless in that sense. And I think, one of my favorite writers, I can't name him, otherwise he'd be like super pissed. He writes how writing is a predatory activity, right? Like you always use what's immediate to you. Like you're having this conversation, next thing you know, you're like, oh, bye, I need to go home. And then like literally, warming this. I guess, as we were thinking about this talk, Xinyi actually pointed this really interesting story on New York Times from a couple of years ago called Who is the Bad Art Friend? I'm not sure if some of you have read this story. Basically, it's about both of them writers. They met in some kind of writer training program a couple of years ago. They're in their 30s. One of them, I forget her name. Maybe we can just remain nameless. One of them decides one day to donate her kidney. And then she started this private Facebook group only with her writer friends and shared like, oh, I've decided, like, she wrote this really personal letter. Like, I come from a family of trauma, but I've always felt that if I were to give, it has to be for a complete stranger. So there was this kind of really ongoing sort of even a whole year, so just like diary sort of her donation and her what she's going through and her support of this. And then the next thing she knows, 1 year later, someone also she added to this group who never replied to any of the message, published a story that somehow deals with kidney donation. And she only found out through a friend. And then through more and more investigation, like first of all, the other person denied that this was inspired by her. She like fully claimed the artistic autonomy of the story in no relation to the real life events of her donation. But I guess long story short, in the end, we find out that she really, so also the one who writes the story is a Chinese American writer. She had such issues with the other donor who is white. She really thought it was a kind of white savior complex. And she wrote this. So what the story that she wrote is that this Chinese American girl had a car accident and needed a kidney. And then this white girl wanted to donate. And in the end, she refuses the kidney and then dies. And it was extremely personal, actually. I think there was so much ethical judgment to the part of the donor. And I guess, we were just thinking about the story. I guess it really, in terms of legally speaking, it's the plagiarism, because in the story, she actually uses the personal letter from that Facebook chat. But I guess for our conversation, it's really about the line between friendship and artistic freedom, right? Like when you cast judgment that will kind of break a friendship, do you still do it for your artistic integrity? And I guess for me, I always
it's so hard.
Yeah.
What do you think, Alvin?
As you read my story, I always cast judgment on the characters or subjects because somehow that makes me feel like it really helps form the subject even more because I judge. And but I think you don't, right? As you said, your relationship to the characters, however fabricated they are, it comes from a place of admiration and trust.
I think so. I think I want to take care of my characters. Although my goal is definitely not to make a charming, good-looking figure in my paintings, but I also make sure they don't look bad. I want them to be interesting, rich, and I don't know. I take care of them, and I don't make judgment. But I want them to be very interesting characters
Mhm,
in the painting.
mhm, mhm. So speaking of the characters, I
Mhm.
think we can also talk about it from a gender perspective. I know in your earlier work, you kind of almost exclusively paint male
Mhm.
subjects. And I
Yeah.
think for quite a few years, your work were predominantly read through the lens of like, inverting the male gaze, the kind of investigating power dynamics, like 2016, 17, like, that's the kind of moment. Like, do you think that was the early focus on male subject, this kind of deliberate attempt at investigating that?
Well, I'm glad this painting is here. I made this painting in 2016. The title, Michèle, could you pronounce what?
Yes, it's called Frenchman.
Well, I had a German roommate. According to her, it means something like you feel embarrassed on someone else's behalf.
Exactly.
Thank you. I was inspired by a Spanish movie from the 90s. It's called Ham Ham. To give a very, very, very short summary of the movie, was like these two guys. One of them was played by Javier Bardem, and when he was very young, and he kind of played a very charming guy, and he fell in love with a girl, and then but this girl have a boyfriend, and then these two guys kind of like got really upset, and then they happened to be in a warehouse of ham, like Spanish ham legs. So both guys just picked a ham leg, and they had a fight. And then one guy got really injured, and he knelt down, and then he died. So I found that was really violent, very masculine, and very absurd. And I wanted to make a movie, and I didn't want to paint the characters because I don't have personal relationship with them. So I asked people to model for me, and that I wanted to paint exactly this moment of this guy kneeling down. And I also happened to observe the testicles are sagging like that, and I really wanted to paint that. But then I don't feel like comfortable with saying that I want to paint paintings from a female gaze, because I felt like it's really hard for me to understand what does that mean. And I love some of Courbet's paintings from the 1860s. I think they are very magical, and I don't want to be the opposite from that perspective. And then I also felt like also from that time on, I felt like I don't want to paint masculinity as a very general idea. I felt I guess there is a wide spectrum of what does it mean to be a male. And I felt, and that's also kind of, I got into painting characters. So I felt like I kind of changed. Yeah.
And how have, I guess, female subjects and other life forms could, in recent years, you also start painting animals and dogs. How have them, what was the process of, I know, because every choice we make on your canvases seems so precise. It takes so long for you to kind of let them in. If you could speak a bit more on that.
Yeah, I wanted to paint female figures, but for a long time I couldn't find an entry point. I felt also, I feel like the technical development was really important. I think when I was in Baltimore, because I wanted to say goodbye to everything I learned I had before, it almost felt like learning a new language. And I didn't know how to paint the face, so I avoid every way to have to paint a face in a painting. And then I learned, and then also learned how to paint the body, but I didn't know how to paint any clothes. So everybody was naked, and then I learned how to paint the clothes. This is a water painting I love from the Louvre. I I was working on the For a Light, that painting of the smoking painting. I went to before I worked on the clothes, I went to Louvre and I got a close look of this beautiful Watteau painting. I loved how how bright, I don't know, how light the fabric felt. And so I kind of just taught myself how to like learning new painting language. So for a long time, when I didn't know how to paint clothes, I didn't want to paint a female figure because she has to be naked. And then when you paint I wonder if you could paint if it's possible to make a unsexualized female nude. And I don't know how to do it, so I didn't do it. But now, I know how to paint clothes. I felt like my vocabulary grew and I could paint subtle emotions. And I also made a female nude.
And there was one in your show at Matthew Marks, right?
Yeah, I recently made a female nude painting. It's very much inspired by the Orange of the World, by Courbet, in Musée d'Orsay. And I paint, but in my painting, I wanted to have the face, and I also wanted to the perspective a little bit upper. But then I wanted to paint the figure unsexual. But then how can I have a compelling female nude without being sexualized? That was a struggle. And I distorted the hand. Well, there was a huge
I wonder if we could go there with
maybe we
slides.
can show the painting.
Which one is it?
It's
I think we could go find it. It is this one.
yeah,
Go back.
this
Yeah.
one. Yeah. So I think I kind of figured something out to have something exciting going on, to have a distorted hand in the foreground. And then I always love the Georgie O'Keeffe landscape paintings where she painted the mountains and the bushes like a body. And I feel like maybe I could paint a body like a landscape. Well, just the pubic hair area. So yeah, I'm glad I can paint female figures as well. And I also met my friend Ruo Yi. She's a close friend of mine in Paris. And she has this really beautiful ageless face, and she is a very special person. So I also painted her in a couple of pictures.
One more question on this private public subject. Like, I think your motifs really matured and developed in tandem with major sociopolitical changes in the past few years. With Me Too and the recent pandemic, I think minor feelings and private affects matters really came into public purview. And I wonder how such shifts in life have informed the choices that you make in your work, if at all.
I think COVID really changed how I worked. I think I used to make paintings about social situations, smoke, drinking, and people getting close to each other, flirting. And I felt like COVID happened, and I just felt like those was not nice. Well, I don't feel like it's not urgent for me to make that kind of paintings. Also, like, everybody wears masks for 2 years. It's just impossible to make anybody look interesting with masks, in my opinion. So I also paint. So I made some paintings of animals, also figures alone. I felt like it's also my first time I wanted to make paintings about existential crisis or abstract idea about disappearance. Yeah, like this painting, I wanted to make this person disappear in this whirlpool. And then this also, I wanted to make this also kind of look like cosmic. So yeah, I think kind of really changed how I work.
I'd like to come to the last part of the conversation about 10 minutes before we move to the Q&A, but mentioning sociopolitical tensions and outer circumstances, Alvin and Xinyi, you both live abroad and outside of mainland China today. Xinyi, you've lived in America and you've been in Europe for a while. And Alvin, you've recently relocated to London from Shanghai. Talking about or thinking about relocation and displacement on a personal level, but whether that also reflects in your practice, what are some of the thoughts that you could share with us?
Guess you could even take that as a question. No. Yeah.
I think it's a decision to live in Paris, to move to Paris for me. I don't know. I think I'm very happy to be in Paris because Paris is really beautiful. And like, so I think kind of this aesthetic is really important to me because personally, I can now imagine working in social realism aesthetic. Like and I also felt like in Paris, I can look at really great art and Louvre and Musée d'Orsay. Yeah.
I guess.
What do you think?
No, because as the catalog essay that I was writing, I was, so just very briefly, the essay I wrote was looking at this aspect of weighting of Xinyi's characters in her painting and how this kind of weighting, which obviously have a long history in painting, like how they depicts the state of idleness and how Xinyi makes the state of idleness seem okay, like they're at play and then they're not working, they're just kind of smoking a cigarette, waiting for nothing to like in a lot of cases. And while we were writing, I think Xinyi pointed out, while I was writing, Xinyi pointed out that for her, more than a state of being idle, it's a state of being displaced. So I was, curious if you can share with us a bit also the state of displacement. Is there some degree of self-referentiality there?
I feel like this displacement in the painting is more like me working against being naturalistic and realistic. I feel like I don't want to have a defined space. I actually spend most of the time working on a background, but the background, I usually don't have anything specific, but I look for a certain texture or a certain color that I feel very, I feel right. I feel displacement kind of means creative freedom, like being able to be somewhere else, to be able to transcend something. Yeah.
It's interesting because this throughout our conversation, we kind of continue to return to your firm, rejection of realism, right? And then this kind of pursuit of your freedom and the way you paint and what you paint. And I'm also curious in terms, because, beyond affect theory and kind of more Western, kind of rising from the 90s in relation to, Masumi and Berlin and all that. I mean, in any tradition, Romanticism also kind of had this kind of penchant for, expressing emotions. And even in China, I mean, there are scholars like David Wang Wei, who writes about the lyrical in the epic times, and this kind of tendency of expressing selfhood in relation to emotion. And I think perhaps if we want to share a bit about some of the other influences, I know Roland Barthes' Lover's Discourse is like huge for you. And then there are recent paintings that you kind of reference using like Lu Xun's writing as well.
Yeah, I made a painting on Lu Xun's old stories retold. I think he wrote that book in 1920s, and I was thinking, and then there was one story called Forging the Swords, which was really compelling to me. And I also thought at that time in China was such a turbulent time, and he went back to a very old tale, but then to reflect, I felt like because it's an old tale, it's very unrealistic and it's mythological. So I felt that gave him a lot of freedom to reflect on social and political events in China. And I recently found that to be very, very inspiring.
Yeah. Are there any works under development that pick up this aspect of myth making as metaphor or illusion?
Yeah, I think so. I had a lot of problem with telling stories in my painting because I'm afraid of being illustrated. But in the last 2 years, I kind of felt like I broke free from this fear, because what matters is how you tell the story. And you can tell with a lot of passion and could be interesting. So I am interested in working with allegories, old tales in the future.
Yeah, do you have any words to conclude? We could go on forever. I think that it feels like there's still a lot to uncover. But shall we move on into the more interactive way of a Q&A for the audiences? First of all, thank you for letting us witness this beautiful dynamic.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. It was so great learning about your work and also your work, Alvin. But if you're interested in his writing, do approach him directly, which we also will have time for at the drinks reception after the Q&A. But I would now like to open the Q&A and hopefully can encourage you to ask some questions, to come forth with anything you'd like to know about Xinyi's practice and Alvin's writing.